Okay, one thing you need to understand, if you don't already, you probably do, is that all professors are not going to teach you the same way, or even they don't have the same understanding, the same values in how they approach the business. Um, I think I'm the only one that, for example, that practiced journalism in America. So America may have different approach to journalism, and in fact, certainly within America itself, different editors have different ways of directing their reporters. So if I tell you something different than one of the other instructors, that doesn't mean it's right or wrong, or that they're right or wrong. It's just a different perspective to how we do things. Um, so don't be too confused. However, you should know that I'll be the one grading projects 1 through 3. So for projects 1 through 3, I'm your editor, your director, however, whatever role I'm playing here. And so I'm the one that gets to tell you whether I like it or don't like it. And so for these particular projects, I'm the boss. Obviously, you need to listen very carefully to other professors who have other projects, including your final project. I won't be grading. Okay, so um, you have to adapt, and that's not a bad thing in class because that's a very realistic thing in the real world. Even within the daily newspaper I used to work at, there were 10 editors that reviewed the reporter stories. In fact, actually more than that. Sometimes there were as many as 14. Um, and we didn't all agree on what was the right way to do it. And the editor and who takes over that story is the one that gets to decide if he's going to rewrite a portion of it, rewrite all of it. I had one colleague there who rewrote a lot of stories from start to finish. I thought that was kind of bizarre because we hired our reporters to be professionals, and they were pretty good at what they did. And this guy I thought was very egotistical to just presume that his writing was better than any other person's writing, because actually I didn't think it was. But when he was given a story, he had the right to do that. He took a lot of time rewriting people's stories. I never, I can't remember as a professional ever, well, I won't say that. In that daily newspaper where we had higher salaries and better trained journalists, I never rewrote anybody's story from scratch. I did have to do it as an editor and owner of my own newspaper because I was hiring. It was a smaller newspaper, lower budget, and I was hiring people who had never been trained. And so sometimes I did have to rewrite their stories, and I would help them to understand why I changed their stories and help them become better. And many of the people that I hired became award-winning journalists without ever going to college for that purpose. In fact, that's actually how I will. I did not upload it to our website yet, but I will upload into week 4 what I call an excerpt anyway from my crash course in journalism. That's something I'm rewriting right now because it's getting dated a little bit. But some of what I will teach you will be from my own textbook. I started writing that a number of years ago, exactly in the situation that I'm explaining to you. Is that I was hiring people without any training at all, and I needed to train them quickly. And so I started writing down what I needed them to understand, the very basics of journalism. And I found even when I started teaching that that was very useful. The first job I got was with the State University of New York College at Buffalo, and one of the courses they gave me was a course on advanced news reporting, I think it was. Anyway, and they gave me a book that thick to teach them with. That's not how you learn advanced news reporting, is not reading a book. Not to say the book didn't have valuable material in it, But if the whole time, if I'd forced them to read that book, what would I have to do? Well, I'd have to give them quizzes. We'd have to discuss it. In other words, that book would have consumed most of our time in that class. And so instead of doing that, we started a news service. And I had my students going out and writing real stories based on real events in the community. And we were sending them out to the weekly newspapers in the area that didn't have a good budget. And so many of our stories were picked up by the local newspapers. The daily newspaper wouldn't have printed our stuff, but the weekly newspapers would. And so that's what we did. And my crash course in journalism is only like 120 pages long, and a lot of that is kind of workbook sort of stuff. And so I kept it the reading part was very short. The reading part of my textbook is like 50 pages or something, because that's what I think a person all they really need in order to get started anyway. And then if they want to read the thick textbook to improve themselves, that's fine. But I had, when I was my second college job, we were competing with other student newspapers. And the second job I had was only what we call in America community colleges. Community colleges are just 2-year colleges. They are well, first off, universities in America are usually 4 years, but they only go 2 semesters. Typically, they don't do it during the summer. I crashed through faster than that because I did go in the summer. But most of them are planned to be 4 years. And so the community college would do the first 2 years, for their freshman and sophomore years, and then junior and senior years would be at a regular university. And within the state system, the universities were required to take people that were moving from the community college to the university and include their work for their general education courses and stuff. Anyway, all that is to explain, I was only dealing with freshmen and sophomores, and we were competing in this competition with full universities with freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and even in some cases graduate students. And it was being judged by the Society of Professional Journalists in America, which is, as the name suggests, is the Society of Professional Journalists. It's an organization of professional journalists to help professional journalists become better. But one of their services, you guys could say, is to set up competitions for student journalists. And so our material was being sent to the regional Society of Professional Journalists to be judged against the universities. Well, in the 5 years we were there, my students won first place in general news writing 3 of the 5 years, and we were competing against some of the top universities in the country. The other two years they won second place 1 year, and the other year they won second and third place. We also won in categories like investigative reporting and other things, news reporting, things like that. But I was particularly proud of the fact that my students, my freshmen and sophomores, were beating the juniors and seniors and graduate students from these other universities in the most important category for a student journalist, that is general news reporting. Because if you can't write general news, what are you going to do? You're not going to get your first job. So you might get a job in sports reporting, but you're not going to get a job. They're not going to hire you to be the editorial writer. They're not going to hire you to be, to have a job that is beyond your capability. And so everybody starts as a general news writer. So I was proud of that, and that was based on using my textbook. That's all we used, because I then immediately sent them out to do real stories. We also won our very first year in competing. We won the top student newspaper award. So it sometimes less is more. That's what I found. If you really understand the pure basics of the business, then it's a matter of just going to work in as realistic a fashion as possible. So that's been my philosophy. So I'm going to teach you some of the basics that I taught those students. Um, and I'll put my crash course up in week 4. Um, Let me though right now just go ahead and review these all 3 projects because they all interact. We've talked about a little bit already, but I have made some updates, and this has been uploaded to week 4. So this update is there also. So project 1. So this again is your individual project with 10%, and unless we gave you a different, did we give you a different deadline than this? This is the deadline in looking at it, I decided to put on it. But if you have a different, deadline? Ah. Okay, well, I didn't know you guys had started yet. That's why I didn't, that's why I set it for that. So let's change that. No, I don't want to make it next week, but I do want to maybe move it up 1 week so that it's instead of the second, it'll be whatever the last Friday is, or actually this is a Saturday, the last Saturday of October. So, so you still have a little bit of time to work on it. Mm, What is it? Today is okay, Saturday would be, is that next week? In, okay, so you're getting that 1 extra week is what you're getting? Okay, that's fine, that's good then. Because you may learn a few things from what I'm saying, and maybe, since I haven't been here, I presumed you needed a little bit of time to do it the way I wanted you to do it, okay? So you may find that there's some differences between your current understanding and what we'll talk. Um, this is in 2 weeks, or is this 1 week up here? Yeah, because next week would be okay. Well, okay, we will say that. The only problem will be is if that fouls up um, the rest of the semester. I don't know uh, what else is planned. So we'll send you out a notice if that doesn't work. Okay, so yeah, okay, we'll try this then. However, um, let me say that I'm doing this in part because the next one is only a week later. So you need to get done as soon as you can so you can get to project 2 quickly. So if it's, um, yeah. So I am giving you a little bit longer in project 1, but you may have less time for project 2 than you thought. So um, get done with project 1 as soon as you can. The deadline to me is November, whatever that was, 2nd. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't finish sooner for your team's sake, so you can get to project 2, right? So you don't want to screw up project 2 by being slow in project 1. So let's again just make sure you understand what my understanding, because I did change a few things from the way it was described previously. So let's just go word for word through this. You're required to interview 10 individuals on campus, not course mates or students from these departments. Along with team members, see assignment 2, select the news topic of interest to other Xiamen students. You will do assignment 1 by yourself, but assignment 2 will be completed with your team using the same material gathered collectively for assignment 1. Therefore, all team members need to interview different people, but on the same topic. You are required to video record all 10 interviewees, You can use your mobile device or a more sophisticated camera as you may choose. Upload the raw video to YouTube for the instructor to review. So raw video to YouTube. You don't need to give it to me. You don't need to hand it to me. Just upload it. Obviously, you're not going to get a lot of views on YouTube, but so don't worry about that. But it'll facilitate it for me to just go to it quickly and to take a look at it. Write a 3-paragraph introduction to your news story using print news writing convention explained and demonstrated by the instructor. And we'll go more than that today and on Friday as well. Your 3 paragraphs should include the lead, a second paragraph completing your 5W summary, and a bridge to individual interviews. Take unposed photos, an unposed photo of our grammar problem there. Take unposed photos of interviewees. Collect and include in your story the interviewee's name, ID information such as year in school, major, and home country. I would say those 3 things would be okay. And an edited direct quote. Let's talk about that a second. A reporter, I mentioned this before, but not only, as I said, in my perspective, do you not have to, if you make a slight mistake in a direct quote, so that the person who talked to you does not know that you made a mistake, that small error is not a problem. I've never ever been told that I was inaccurate with quotes that I've written down. I mentioned this before. The only ones I've ever been challenged on were the ones I actually had a tape of, because those were the most important ones and the ones that got the person embarrassed. And so they denied it because they were embarrassed, not because it wasn't accurate. It was absolutely accurate because I had the recording. But of the ones that I never recorded, I've never been challenged. And yet I know that I'm not actually word perfect on that. I'm a good note taker, but if you could think about it, if you were, in these interviews you're doing, if you were to go back to that same person or let them see what you've written down as a direct quote, and you were off a few words, but they don't see it again for a couple of days, they won't remember exactly what they said. So as long as you didn't change the intent, as long as you're not more than a couple words off, you're fine. Because in the real world, when we're just taking notes and we're not recording stuff, which most reporters do in America anyway, it's almost impossible to get it absolutely correct. Because you're trying to listen too much, you're going from one quote to another quote. It's very difficult. So I like direct quotes, by the way. I suggest direct quotes somewhere 30 to 40% of a story be direct quotes, because that gives credibility and it also gives more human interest. People express themselves differently, and to make most of your story, or all of your story in direct quotes, really means you're saying in your voice, not their voice. And so your whole story, all your stories sound alike in a sense, because you're saying it the way you would say it. Whereas if you're using a lot of direct quotes, you're saying it like they would say it, and that gives more personality to it. So I like direct quotes for those mainly for those 2 reasons: personality and credibility. Because even though I like to say that a direct quote in print is like video for TV, the reader gives it higher credibility. Obviously, real video deserves it. Although even video can be taken out of context. You can take a video and make somebody sound really stupid by editing it, right? You understand what I'm talking about. Especially if you have a fairly long interview, it's pretty easy to make it sound like somebody believes one thing when they really weren't trying to say that, because you have a lot of material to choose from and you can just choose what you want. And so you can even have a direct quote, even video, and be a liar in a sense. Liar to the intent of what that person was trying to say. So the other thing, though, what I was getting to is you definitely change somebody's quote if they use bad grammar. We're not trying to make them look stupid. So, on the one hand, sometimes we're a little bit off because, unintentionally, because we just missed the quote slightly. On the other hand, we purposely change it if they use bad grammar and we need to correct it. A lot of people, for example, never end a sentence. They just go on and on and on, and they add another conjunction. They go further and they go further, and their sentences are way too long and boring to put in as one sentence. It's totally okay to break their long sentence into pieces. And it's, again, if they use the wrong verb tense or whatever, that's okay too. I mean, you change it. Don't make them look like an idiot. And so there's two examples right there of sometimes just by mistakes, the quotes are not going to be exact, and sometimes on purpose, you're going to change them for their sake and not worry about it. The only time when you have to worry about making that decision is if you're someplace with lots of reporters, and it's possible for the source to say that you misquoted because some other people have quoted them differently. However, you know what happens in the White House after they have a press conference? Reporters get together and agree what the president said because they don't want to look stupid and they know they aren't not word perfect. And so they take their best guess and they get together and say, oh, well, let's say he said this. And so they realize that their note taking is not perfect. And so they have to approve. They get together and agree what the president said. So it's kind of, yeah, so that's the real world. Okay, so when you're preparing your direct quotes for this, you're responsible for making it sound good. You're the editor, and so if you need to break sentences into smaller sentences, if you need to correct their grammar, and if they don't say anything interesting, well, ask some more questions. Try to get them to say something interesting, because you're responsible for what's going into the story. And if you just can't, if somebody's hopeless, interview another person, replace them, kick them out, because you are responsible for this story. And so if you have to interview 12, 13 people to get 10 good ones, then do it. Just throw the other ones out. This isn't a survey. We're not skewing the survey. I mean, if you were to do that purposely because you didn't like that person's opinion, no, don't do that. But if they're boring, then you replace them. And maybe you may or may not get somebody that says more or less the same thing. But again, the number, we're not trying to treat this like a scientific survey anyway. And you're not, and with that caveat, you definitely don't want to make, if your subject is somewhat controversial, you don't want to skew your story by choosing somebody else. And so you may have to interview a couple more people to get somebody to represent the same perspective if you think by throwing somebody out, you've done that. You've skewed it. You're misrepresented what people think. So you can do that too. But the main point is you don't want a boring person in there. So you try to first off make them not boring by asking them some follow-up questions. Get them to talk some more. So maybe you have a little bit more to choose from, and throw the boring stuff out and keep the good stuff. But if that fails, if you can't get somebody to be interesting, no matter how much you talk to them, then you throw them out altogether and you replace them with somebody else. Because ultimately, we're in the business of getting readers and keeping readers. That's both from a financial perspective as well as from a pure readership perspective. I mean, you want to be read. You want your stuff to be interesting. And so you do not want to put into your story something that's so boring that nobody wants to read it. And you are the writer. You are responsible for it. And so, and the other thing is, as a medium, a professional medium, you are also competing against all the other news sources. And so you can't be boring from a competitive sense either. So you want to have your stuff to be most important from a personal perspective, that your stuff will be more interesting than stuff that another reporter in your same company is doing, because that will mean you get to move up in the organization and they don't, because your stuff is more interesting. And you want it to be more interesting because your newspaper is competing against a bunch of other news organizations. And if you're not interesting, your company may go broke. And or it's at least not going to have as many readers. If they don't, uh, readers attract advertising, and so if your newspaper is more interesting, or whatever medium it is, if you are more interesting than somebody else, you'll have more readers eventually. And if you have more readers, you have more readers to sell to advertisers, because that's what you're selling advertisers. You're selling readers to them. And that's, in most cases, how news media make their living, off of advertising. So this is important to you individually. It's important to your organization, that you are competitive. And yeah, so as I said, then put down good quotes. I'm definitely not saying change their quotes just to make it more interesting. Don't falsify their quotes. No, we don't do that. But if you have to ask more questions to get them to say something more interesting, ask more questions. If you need to go dump somebody and go replace them with somebody else, go ahead. Just do it. Where did I leave off here? Okay. Not as part of your grade, but as a learning activity, listen to your recorded interviews without stopping the recording, and try to take notes of the interviews as if you were not recording them. In other words, this is a live interview, and you take notes as if you had no backup. And I want you to do that for your sake, so you can understand how hard it is. You need to practice that. And so just, you're not going to hand it in, you're not going to get graded for it, but I really suggest very strongly that you go through this experience, because it will help you when you get a real job, not to screw it up, because you need to understand what you can do and what you can't do. And one of the biggest problems I found with my untrained reporters, well, I'll even go beyond that. All my new reporters, even if they had journalism training, that didn't mean they had a lot of experience. To me, your quotes, indirect and direct, but I already mentioned why I like a lot of direct quotes. But your quotes, indirect and direct quotes, are your bricks that you build your building with, so to speak. Those are your bricks. If you get through an interview and you have no bricks, or you have five bricks, you can't build a house with five bricks. You need those bricks. The bricks are your quotes. And so, many times, what I have found from beginning reporters, whether they've been trained in a university or not, is that they start taking notes. And I'm sure I did this too when I first started. They start taking notes, and about halfway through a quote, they're listening at the same time. They hear something else, so they abandon the first quote and they go start a second quote. And then they get about halfway through that, they hear something else interesting, and they abandon the second quote and they go to the third quote. And they can get through an entire 30-minute interview and have no direct quotes. They have a bunch of half a quotes that they're trying to fill in for as partial quotes or indirect quotes. They end up with no direct quotes, because they didn't know how to control themselves. And so one of the first things you need to learn how to do as a reporter is realize you're not a stenographer. You cannot do this perfectly. You can get two or three people in the same room. The stories are going to turn out differently, particularly if they're not using recording devices. Their notes are going to be totally different. One person's going to write down one thing, someone else is going to write something else down. To the degree that they overlap, that's interesting. Now, that means they both clicked onto something very interesting that they both jumped on. But in the real world, you cannot hope to get the 10 best quotes out of an interview because you don't know which are going to be the 10 best quotes. And you started writing one and you abandoned it. And you went to another one and you abandoned it. There's no way to evaluate your quotes as you're writing them down and know which are going to be the best 10 until it's too late, right? And so you have to be realistic about it and gather your bricks. Now, if you start writing one and you kind of intuitively realize that wasn't as interesting as I thought, then you abandon it on purpose because you can go ahead and make it an indirect quote later. But if you have a pretty good quote, be very reluctant to abandon that quote too soon because you need those, however many quotes, and depending how long your story is and stuff, you need some direct quotes to write a good story. And so you have to discipline yourself and make sure you come out of, especially, say it's a 30-minute interview, you've got to come out of that with 10 direct quotes. And that shouldn't be real hard because those direct quotes are like, one or two sentences each at the most. So if we're saying 10 sentences, during that half an hour, you probably had 100 sentences and you just needed 10 of them. Or maybe even more than that, probably 100, probably 200 sentences in 30 minutes. Another thing that was kind of an eye opener for me is that sometimes I would turn on a recorder. I got an attachment and stuck it to my telephone because I knew sometimes that when I called somebody up, that those people who had not agreed to an interview were pretty likely to hang up on me. And so sometimes I would make that phone call and turn on my tape recorder, and they would say something like, no comment. I don't like what's going on. I think that the mayor is doing the wrong thing, and but I just don't want to talk about it. Well, he just talked about it, right? He gave me one or two quotes already, and I didn't agree not to go on record with him. And so I've got, just in a few seconds, he gave me a couple of quotes, and I had it on record. And so, but in doing that, I realized just how much material you can have in 10 or 15 seconds. If I can get him to continue to talk for 15 seconds, I probably have 4 or 5 quotes if I'm recording it. So it's just kind of an eye opener to understand just how much you can get with a short interview, even if they're going to in the process of hanging up on you, but also that there's no way you can capture it all in an interview. Just recognize that and capture, like I said, in a 30-minute interview, at least come out with 10 direct quotes, and then you have something to build with. That doesn't mean you're going to use them all, but you've got some bricks to work with. So discipline yourselves and understand that. Okay. So that is that last bullet item there. I just want you to experience that and understand the challenges of taking notes. Now, you guys take notes, or you should be taking notes every day in class. That's it. I was a big note taker in class, and I really think that was one reason why I got very good grades, is because those notes were useful to me later, and those notes, that is a type of learning. Kinesthetic learning is physical learning, and writing is a physical activity that helps you remember stuff, and then later on use them anyway. So anyway, you have lots of opportunity as students to practice note taking, and so in other classes and stuff, practice your note taking. If you really think you're going to be a journalist, you need to learn how to be good note takers. Okay, what do you actually submit? Send me the URL for the raw video, and then your story will have your introduction, 3 paragraphs, plus then a student photo, with the ID. I didn't put that in there, but exactly. But the ID information I gave, their name, their year and major. So you can say second year in accounting, and then from China, something like that. So tell us who this person is, and then the direct quote. Okay. Okay, going on to project two, just make sure you understand that. And I see a few of these things I'm changing a little bit from what you were told before. So take note of that. Um, okay, so this one is due just a week after the first one. So as I said, even though I've given you an extra week on that first one, you shouldn't take the whole week if you don't need it. The sooner you get done with project one, you can go to project two, and as a team, obviously with project two, it's more teamwork. And so, anyway, um, get on that as soon as you can. So you will be assigned as teams, 4 to 5 members, to complete this assignment based on your individual work in assignment one. Your group is required to select the top 10 interviews from among all team members' individual interviews to use in the team's video story. But I added this, but at least 2 interviews from each of the team members. So in selecting, it's not quite the 10 best, because I don't want you to use only one person. Okay, so I want at least 2 interviews from each member of the team. So if you have 5 members, that means really it's going to be the best 2 from each set, right? Um, so I want everybody to be included in the team project. Okay, so you should submit your news video story of about 3-4 minutes, something like that. The script, it doesn't have to be exact. If you're a little bit over, um, even 4 minutes may be a little challenging, but maybe not. It should be okay. But I'm not asking for you to be real precise on this, so don't worry too much about precision. The script should be similar to that of assignment one, except you are inserting the 10 video interviews, obviously, instead of, they're not in written form anymore. Although you can go ahead and put the transcription in for me, that would be good. And you can add a conclusion at the end. That's one of the differences between newspaper writing and TV writing. In newspaper writing, we consider a conclusion to be amateurish. We don't, with some exceptions, if it's analytical, if it's obviously if it's an editorial, some feature stories, but by and large, we're trying to write an inverted pyramid. And you probably know this already, and sorry if I. Do you know how the inverted pyramid was started? When it was started? It was started during the Civil War in America. And of course, the Civil War was North against South. So it was an internal war. And the boundaries of where people were fighting was shifting all the time. The South would start winning, they'd move north. The North would start winning, they'd move south. And they needed to have telegraph to telegraph information into their headquarters. And they allowed the reporters to use the telegraph to telegraph in their stories. And so there were reporters from New York and Philadelphia and other major cities who were out near the front lines observing what was happening and writing their stories. There was a problem with that. One of the key things you had to do against the enemy was to cut off their communication. So sometimes the North would blow up the telegraph line. Sometimes the South would blow up the telegraph line, depending who was winning at the time. So what was happening is that the reporters were telegraphing in their stories, and suddenly the line went down. And so what was the natural thing for the editors to say? Give me the most important stuff first. Because they were afraid they'd never get it otherwise. That's how the inverted pyramid began. So the reporters started giving the most important stuff first, and lo and behold, they thought, this is actually a pretty good way to write a story. And even readers liked it that way. They could figure out very quickly whether they wanted to read the whole story, and if not, they could go on to another story. And so this has captured the world is all by mistake. And this wasn't planned. It was because of the Civil War. And so when you're working as an editor, you have to like if I were what in America we call a news editor. Uh, at the newspaper I was at, 10 of the editors were on the main copy desk. They're called copy editors. The news editor was in charge of everybody else. So you have your news editor. It used to be in the round table. Copy editor. Around the desk, you had these copy editors. And right down here also have a wire editor. That was my job, part of my editor would say, in the paper that day, um, usually the sports section is differently, and there's a feature section differently. But in the news section of the newspaper, he might have, let's say, he has 20 pages. Now, in the big newspaper, that might have 50, but depending on the day. Um, and the day of the week is very important in a daily newspaper. Sunday is the biggest newspaper in every daily newspaper in America because people have time to sit down and read the newspaper. And so it's very thoroughly read and it's very thick, very thick. Um, Monday is very small. Now people are going back to work. Uh, the advertisers spend all their money on Sunday. And so Monday is one of the smallest papers of the day, of the week, usually. Tuesday's not much better. Wednesday is big because Wednesday is when the grocery stores like to put their ads in the paper, and they have coupons in them, stuff like that. So their Wednesday paper gets quite big, and so that's big. Thursday, small again. Friday, maybe a little bit bigger because of entertainment. Oops, whatever. So this is a little bit bigger. Friday because of entertainment. Saturday is small again as people prepare for Sunday. One of the strategies in trying to survive some of the newspapers in America, because they're losing so much advertising to the internet, they are killing Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. They're just coming out Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday are the only days they're going to come out. And I would suspect that's maybe a growing trend eventually because in the newspaper I used to be at, it's about 1/3 the size it used to be because newspapers have lost 2/3 of their print advertising in America. And so these ones are profitable, the other ones are not profitable. Anyway, so they're sitting around here, and the news editor says, okay, Ken, out of those 20 pages, you have 8 pages for wire stories. And so he takes the other 12 pages, not necessarily full pages, and has on it too. And so, he may then assign out, basically, if he has only 12 pages, that's kind of a small paper. But basically, you can have 2 pages, you can do everything in 2 pages. And he's going to assign local stories to these ones. So these ones are the local stories, local, and then he'll ask me to fill, also send them out. But anyway, so I'm going to send out wire pages to these people with wire stories. So they have those stories. We give them the stories to put in them. They have to write the headlines, and they have to design the page. They have to desktop publish it using something like Quark or InDesign that you guys will either are or will learn here. And we are automatically given more news than they can put on the page. And so whether they like it or not, these editors are going to design the page. Okay, I'm going to add I think I want here, picture, uh, the whole thing is I'll put one here. This will have to be cut quite a bit. They're going to run that like that. And I will have one up here and put a picture here like that. We're trying to look. You want to balance the page. You want to have a big headline up here that's big kind of small. Called side channel. The there. What does this do to stories? My inverted pyramid. This may be right here might be we measure so this may be 20 inches long, and this looks to me like that's going to be about maximum 10 inches. So half the story is gone. Half the story is gone. This one here might also been say 15 stories. That's about 8 inches. That one's bottom that one's gone. This one here might be 20 inches, and that's about 10 inches. That's gone. We try to not to do that too much with local stories. Those wire stories, those are free game. Wire stories. Most wire stories never get the full story. And so that's why in a newspaper, we simply cannot have conclusions, and we've grown to believe that they're stupid. Most writers make stupid endings, including the writers for TV. If you listen to their conclusions are usually stupid. They're usually they're irrelevant, but they feel like they have to have a conclusion to it. So all that is to say, when you write for print, you don't write conclusions unless it's a special situation where you're given permission to write an analysis or something. But most newspaper stories are not analyses. Most newspaper stories are not editorials, opinions. Most of them are not feature stories, and even feature stories will probably get cut. And so if you've written a conclusion, they might be a little more careful with a feature story to try to make it make sense and not cut the ending, but you can't bet your life on it. That's just the real world in a newspaper. With TV, they can plan a little bit. They plan a little tighter. First off, they have no such thing as a 20-inch story in TV. Newspaper stories can be a lot longer, and so we tell the whole story, even though we might know that it's going to get cut. We want to tell the whole thing, but we write an inverted pyramid. Okay, so in project 2, yes, you can write a conclusion. That's fairly normal in TV, even though print journalists think it's stupid. But you can try not to be stupid. Okay, try to say something that makes some sense. One of the things that I do with print journalists is I say if you really feel like if your English teachers have taught you have to have conclusions and you just can't help yourself, then make your conclusion an indirect quote from somebody else. Find an indirect quote from somebody else that sounds like a conclusion. The police, so you say, we're still looking for the suspect, says, Sheriff Johnson. It's nice little conclusion to the story, but it doesn't say much. It wasn't really important enough to put higher up, but whatever. It's kind of obvious. They haven't caught the guy yet. So you can find an indirect quote or even a direct quote from somebody to put in. And I would suggest that you use something like that if you're going to use a conclusion with your TV script. Attribute it. Don't just say something yourself that's stupid. Attribute to your people. It could be an overall summary. Most of our viewers think this, something. Make some sort of attribution and don't just make up something dumb. So project, oops, I should change this to project 3. Um, oh no, I understand. No, this is right. This is just a note for project 2. Project 3 will require students to complete this whole process largely by themselves. So all students should participate in and learn from the assignment 2 activities in preparation to achieve assignment 3 individually. So um, if you haven't taken any video classes yet, you don't know how to video edit, well, at least watch the member of your team member who knows how to video edit. Um, how many of you have done some video editing in this class? Nobody yet? Or not very many? Okay, we'll do some video editing in class. I'll do some demonstration next week on video editing. Um, I just didn't want to talk down to you if you'd all done some video editing. We'll do some video editing on free software, like Movie Maker is free. So some of you can download Movie Maker. Even though it's free, they no longer, for some reason, download it with Windows. You have to download it separately from their website. Um, but anyway, but it's still free. There's other free softwares as well that you can tap into. So I'll do some training next week on some free software. Um, I will train in not just the video software, but also audio software. You might look for some of the stuff yourselves. If when you have time. So if you don't yet have a video editor on your computer, at least if you have a Windows computer, then you're talking about Movie Maker. There are lots of videos, online videos, YouTube videos on that. Although they about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, maybe now, they changed Movie Maker. So you have to be careful not to get a video training you on the old version. They're more or less the same. So make sure you have the updated Maker training video. Audacity is an audio editor and maker. You can do your voiceover audio in Audacity, and it's a really good editor, although it's free. I have a friend who worked in Hollywood. Oh, he's working in Hollywood now, but after about 10 years working in Hollywood as a video editor, he came to Kazakhstan because he had a girlfriend there, and so he took a leave of absence from Hollywood, and he among other things, he came to our university and we put him to work teaching broadcasting. And he said, well, what software do I have? And he was thinking he would have, state-of-the-art software, and we didn't have state-of-the-art software at our university. So we basically put him to work with software like this. But he was very amazed what you get with Audacity as an audio creator. That it was free. Amazing to him. I've used it a lot. It is a very powerful program. So if you need audio and you need editing on it, but you can even do multi-track. So if you do 5 instruments, you could create a band by yourself. Basically, do one track, and put the headset on while you're doing the second track, and do the third track, fourth track, fifth track, and you can play all 5 instruments and blend them together in Audacity. Anyway, there's other screen capture softwares I might talk about. If you don't know, in PowerPoint, if you need visuals, you can do a save as JPEGs. or JPEG or GIFs or TIFFs, whatever. All you have to do is create your visuals on PowerPoint, do a and save as a graphic, and it will kick out all of your slides or any one of them, all or one, nothing in between. Well, yeah, I don't think anything in between. It's either all or one. So you can do one slide at a time, or you can do all the slides, and he'll put them, kick them all out as whatever format you want into one folder, and you can then use those like you would some other graphics. So you can create very easily with PowerPoint, create some pretty good visuals without too much effort. You all know how to do PowerPoint. So it's one of those most universal programs in the world, and it's very easy to make visuals with it if you don't have something better than that. Okay, when you get to project 3, again, you're on your own, and this is of the 3 projects I'm going to be grading. This is the one that's worth the most because hopefully by now, by this point, you will have learned how to do the other stuff. Including the audio, visual, or the video and audio editing as necessary. So every individual student must create an individual news feature story of 3 to 4 minutes, similar to assignment 2, largely by themselves. Students must conduct new interviews on a new topic, write their own script, take their own video of the interviewees, and be the news talent, the reader, reporter, whatever you call it, in the final video story. They can get some assistance from other team members in recording the intro and conclusion, since they can't hold the camera and be on at the same time very well, and in the editing production process, but should do as much as they can by themselves in preparation for future coursework. So if you can do the editing yourself, you should. I'm not going to tell you you can't. Among the things, I probably couldn't stop you if I wanted to, but also this is a learning process. So since most of you have not done any video editing yet, if you team up on the video editing, that's okay. But learn how to do it because you will be taking video classes. And so this is a good time to start learning how to do that. So, okay, any questions on any of that? By the way, this PowerPoint is already, well, this much of the PowerPoint is on in week 4, and the rest of this one will be uploaded after class. Because this part I was going to go over a different lesson today, and I decided to switch PowerPoints and talk about something else first. Hmm? Oh, yeah, I didn't upload this one because I changed my mind at the last second. I do like to tell people that journalistic writing is really valuable in lots of ways. I think I mentioned my strongest areas of study were math and science. Um, in the When I was in 8th grade, they did a national test, and in math I was in the top 1/3 of 1%, so really high in math. But when I got into high school, even before that, I realized that wasn't my future. I didn't. I wanted to. I felt like ideas were important. Spreading ideas was an important calling in life, and I didn't think I was going to do that as a mathematician or as a scientist. My brother was a world-class scientist. Very proud of him. And to some degree, he did change the world. He worked with the United Nations some. He traveled the world teaching people the cutting edge science that he was studying. But I didn't feel like that was what I wanted. And actually, English was my weakest area. Yeah, really. And so I had to work at it. Now, I'm not saying I was an idiot with it. I was still, my GPA was always around 3.83 out of 4, something like that, in both high school and college. And my master's degree was a perfect 4.0, and my doctorate was a perfect 4.0. But so I wasn't terrible at it, But when I got into college, I was still struggling with it, with my English classes. And what I found was that English teachers were not consistent in their criticism. And I wasn't learning anything from English teachers. They would say they didn't like it, liked it, they put it a grade, and I never understood what I should do to improve my writing. They just didn't. They were inconsistent. And while there's some inconsistency among all professors, in that was probably the most inconsistent that I found any professors was regular English composition. And and so I was, A minuses, B pluses, whatever. But I was struggling to get what I was satisfied with, to keep scholarships and stuff like that. So, but then I started taking journalism classes. And journalism teaches you to write simply. Don't try to write above your control of the vocabulary. Don't write long sentences, write short ones. Um, and I decided, I wonder if that'd work in English class. And so, because I myself, and it's probably even worse for people, from my experience, even working with professors for whom English is a second or third or fourth language, is that they try to sound smart. They make a big effort to sound smart. Students do that too. I was doing that. Okay, I was trying to sound smart, and that was actually what was making me struggle. So as I started applying English principles or journalism principles to my English classes, then I started getting straight A's in English. The English teachers, I've had many of my own students tell me this. Why didn't the English teachers teach me this? Um, and they found the same experience I did, that once I taught them from a journalistic perspective, they started acing their English classes. Professors themselves, English professors, do not know what they like. I mean, they sense it. They give you a grade, yes, but they don't know how to teach you to write the way they like. But one of the simplest ways to do it is simply stop trying to sound smart. Rather sound interesting. Make sure you have interesting information and write it clearly, as powerfully as you can, but don't try to use words you don't fully grasp, you don't fully control, and don't write long sentences. Simplify your writing just like you do in journalism, and you'll do better in English too. And again, that was my experience. That was the experience of many of my students who thanked me for teaching them how to, better than their English teachers were teaching them. So consequently, if you learn how to write that way, learn how to be more concerned about the content and less concerned about how you're going to impress people with your writing. Stop trying to impress people. Try to be clear to people. Have good information and be very clear in your explanation to people, and that's impressive. That's impressive enough right there. And there's some areas where, yes, you can learn how to maybe be just a little bit more clever the way you express stuff and so forth, but it's not really necessary. What they want is clear, good information, good research, whatever it is you're doing, working on, and clarity and simplicity. They don't want to have to read something 2 or 3 times to understand what you're talking about. And that's where you get in trouble when you start using long sentences and words you don't quite grasp, is that causing your teacher to read it 2 or 3 times. And that's the last thing they want to do, is to read something 2 or 3 times to figure out what the heck you're talking about. Okay? Don't do it. Don't do that to them. So that was my experience in English. I never thought I was going to go into public relations, but once I became good at journalism, there was about 10 years where I went into PR marketing, and I was excellent at it because I was an excellent journalist. And I just simply did what journalists do. I just wrote like journalists would write. And I got front page stories free of charge for my company. I've got lead stories on the TV news free of charge for my company, because I wrote well and I wrote interestingly, and they realized they wanted that story. And so it went where it was supposed to go. I wrote like their best reporter. And so they went with it that way. Um, and then when I was working on my master's degree, I think I may have mentioned some of this to you, but I had been in the industry for about 5 years. Um, I started off, I mentioned, as an editor of a big city newspaper, as a weekly, small in size, but 120,000 circulation. Um, did that for a couple of years, and I bought my own newspaper. Had to learn all aspects of the newspaper, and did that for a couple of years and sold it. And I went back for my master's degree. And because maybe I was a little more mature, I don't know, but the professors all wanted me to help them with their research. And so one of the most senior professors came to me with an idea that he wanted me to work with him on. And it was it was a survey of magazine editors to see what they thought of, I think I did mention this before, the quality of journalism graduates. And so I created the survey, and I realized as I was creating the survey that I had serious doubts that I could write an academic story. And so I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? I'm not. I mean, I'm in my first semester as a master's student, but he's put this on my shoulders to totally do this story. He had the idea, and now he's put it on my shoulders to do the whole thing. Now he's probably expecting to redo a lot of it. I don't know, but from my perspective, it's my responsibility to take this the rest of the way. And so, as I was creating this questionnaire for the survey, I thought, for me to do a good job with this, I need to do it journalistically. And so some of my questions were open-ended questions, so that people would give me quotes that I could put into the story, into the journal article. And so I did that. We got a few hundred responses to it. I wrote the story, and not only, I did a good enough job that the professor didn't hardly change. I don't know if he changed anything, almost nothing if he did. And then we sent it off to one of the top journals in those days, and we get a letter back saying, this story is so good. I have a stack of articles from professors all over the country, but your story is so good that I'm going to not only put it in the very next edition of our journal, I'm going to make it the lead story, the number one story in the journal. And I thought, what the heck? I don't know what I'm doing. I just got the lead story in one of the top journals. But that made me realize that even PhDs preferred simple writing. They did not want complex writing, and I could not write like an academic. I hadn't learned how to sound like an academic yet. And so I wrote it like a news story, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. So I'm talking, when you're doing your thesis, try to write more like a journalist. It really is better. Don't think you have to sound smart. You don't. You absolutely don't. Even if you're a professor. Like I said, they pushed all the other PhDs out of the way to put my story number one in the academic journal because I didn't try to sound smart. So use this to your advantage. Okay, I'm going to flip through some of these rather quickly, but it's like I said, I made this last second decision to go through this particular PowerPoint. To me, there's basically three key concepts to Western journalism. The first one I abbreviate as organize to emphasize. And so those three bullet items all relate to that. So I'm trying to, first off, I look at my story. What is the most interesting thing in my story? Now, that's going to end up being my lead and will probably be the headline. So I need to be very careful that I choose the right one. But also, by the way, this goes back to interviewing. At the very time I'm interviewing, I'm thinking about my whammy, what I call the whammy. Because two things. First off, if I find something really interesting, I want to pursue that. So I may have written down a list of questions, but I see something and they say something very interesting to me. I want to pursue that and get more quotes from it, get more information, because ahead of time, while I'm doing the interview, I'm making a pre-decision that could be my lead, that could be my story right there. And so in the middle of the interview, I'm making decisions on how I'm going to write the story. So I'm looking for that whammy. In some cases, the worst thing you can do is not think about that. You get all done with your interview. You're reviewing your notes, and you say, "Oh, that's the best. Oh, that's what I want to use as my whammy, my hook, whatever you want to call it." And then you realize you don't have enough information for it. You didn't ask all the questions you need to ask about it because you hadn't made the decision soon enough. You have to make that decision during the interview, not after the interview. Otherwise, you may not end up with a story at all, at least not on that subject. Despite that being the most interesting thing, you didn't pursue it with your questions. So you have to think about your whammy, your hook, your how you're going to write your story, even during your interview. Um, and that's true to some degree, even with this assignment. If as you start asking this question, if they say something that triggers you, you're allowed to ask a second question, as long as it relates to the first one. If you don't want to go too far off, or it's not going to mesh with your teammates, right? But if they say something interesting that kind of suggests it's still in the ballpark, but they have an angle that you never thought about, well, ask that second question. And you sometimes ask second or third question just to get them talking, so that they have a usable quote. But sometimes it's because they said something in the first one that rang a bell and realized you are also still writing a lead for this. And so as you're doing these interviews, when somebody says something interesting, be sure you get the very best information you can because that's going to be your lead. That's probably not absolutely, but very likely could be. Um, Simplify to clarify, more or less what I was just talking about. Is that too many people write like I used to, trying to sound smart and not sounding clear in the process. You want to keep it simple and clear. That's the most important thing you can do. Keep it simple and clear. And then use the inverted pyramid for the reasons I was talking about. Most interesting stuff at the top, so people can cut it if they have to, whatever you need. I kind of jumped ahead, didn't I? Anyway, powerful lead, we already talked about that. So you're going to emphasize in the lead the whammy. Second one was simplify to clarify, so simple words, simple sentences, simple paragraphs, simple, 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 simple. Nothing that'll make somebody have to read it twice. You don't want anything to have to be read twice in your story. And if you're editing your story and you have to read it twice, then you should really consider rewriting. Because if you had to read something twice to remember what it was you were trying to say, there's a problem. Okay, so now if you just misread it, that's one thing. That's possible. Sometimes I misread my own writing and I confuse myself. But if you had to read it twice to understand what you yourself was trying to write, a couple of days later, that is a red flag. You need to rewrite it. You should never have to ask yourself, what you meant when you were the original writer. Attribute to verify, but I already talked about that, is that direct quotes give credibility. So first off, attribute essentially everything in a news story. That doesn't mean it's all a direct quote, but there should never be a question as to who said this. And we'll get back to how to organize a story a little bit and making sure that you don't confuse people about who's saying something. It's different from TV to print, from print. But attribution is essential. Make sure, don't ever, in news writing particularly, or in newspaper writing, and I would say, web writing, when somebody's going to read it in print, everything should be attributed enough, and you should say nothing. If it's a news story, you should attribute nothing to yourself. In essence, don't write anything from your own perspective, unless it'd be a very rare situation. Let's say you were here the day the tsunami hit back in 2004. Okay, you go first person. Yeah, that's obvious. Okay, you experienced the thing, and so that was so terrible, disruptive, calamitous. That then you have to go first person. But that is an exception. I mean, 100,000 people died, or whatever that was, or whatever number that was, over 100,000 people, and so that's an event that you would go first person on if you were actually there watching it and experiencing it. But other than that, for most news, you're third person. You're trying to be a neutral observer of what happened, and everything becomes attributed. You get all your information from other people, so attribute essentially everything. We already kind of talked about this the other day. My opinion is that the most important. I have a different list of news values than other people do. And to me, the most important ones are consequence, curiosity, and suspense. If you can capture those things, you're going to be well read. The other things are important, but they very seldom end up being a whammy. The five W's of those, why and how, are to me almost universally the most important questions. And again, attribute essentially everything. Okay, so I have when you're lead, we talked about that a little bit already. That third paragraph I was talking about is frequently called a bridge. So you're bridging your in print writing, you're trying to summarize. You start your story by summarizing what your story says. That's your lead. Is typically a summary type lead, and then the way I teach it, paragraph 2, you can usually finish up your 5W summary. And so usually in 2 paragraphs you can summarize your entire story. And then you use a bridge to go into your body, and you should start your body of the story the same place you started your lead, that you started your story. And so one of the easy ways that I found that I could write a story like that, there's been times when I had to write a front page story in 10 minutes because we were sitting on deadline. But the way I could do that is by first off going through my notes and finding the most interesting quote, direct quote. I take that direct quote and I make it into an indirect quote and make that my lead. So I'm making my lead a what's called a speech interview lead based on the most interesting direct quote I have. Then I finish, so that becomes part of the summary. And then in paragraph 2, might be 2 or 3 paragraphs in paragraph 2, or 2 or 3 sentences. I finish my 5 W's as much as are necessary. There might be some of the W's that aren't that relevant. And then in paragraph 3, I use the direct quote I summarized in the first quote, in the first paragraph. And so I'm using an indirect quote in paragraph 1, whereas I'm making it concise and powerful in my own words. I finish this 5W summary in paragraph 2. Paragraph 3, I use the direct quote that gives that person's personality, and it brings us right back to where I started from, and then we go back and forth between direct quotes and direct quotes, direct quotes and direct quotes, all the way down to the bottom of the story. It's done. And so I can write a good story in 10 minutes using that formula. It's a pretty easy formula, but everybody loves my writing. It's a good approach to it. Again, finding that whammy is really, really important because of all the things I said earlier. You're competing within your medium, you're competing for a job, you're competing for a raise, you're competing for a better job at another medium if yours isn't top of the notch. So you're always looking for that hook, that whammy, before you even start a story, because your whole story flows out from that. This is an example of a story I wrote. In America, for 7 years, I wrote, really you would have to call it PR, but I wrote it totally in news fashion. For the state of Washington, I prepared a quarterly publication about migrant education. And so one of the concepts in education is an achievement gap in America, is that we can pretty much predict that Asians are going to be the best students. And right below them will be the white students. And then quite a ways below that will be the other ethnicities. If they're not Asian and they're not white, they're going to be lingering down below for a number of reasons. The migrant students are typically Hispanic. English is not their first language, and they're struggling. They may be getting up in the morning at 4 in the morning, picking cherries or something before they go to school. They face all sorts of adversity. So the migrant students are the very bottom, and so there's a big gap between the Asian and white students and the migrant students. And somewhere in between that are the other students, African American and Native American, are also typically struggle a little bit. And so anyway, the lead says the achievement gap is closing in Washington State, says the state migrant education program director. Okay, what I'm trying to explain in this one is if we're using, this is an example, by the way, of a speech interview lead. Okay, this was from an interview with and what I want you to do, I want you to use a speech interview lead like this for your stories. The reason I want you to do it, it's a very simple lead that you can use lots in your future. And so I want to make sure you know how to do this type of lead. As I said, I can write a story in 10 minutes by using a speech interview lead. If I'm trying to be clever and use some other type of lead, it takes me a lot longer to try to figure out how to word it. Speech interview lead, bam, I can get that out real fast. So in all of your work and all of your stories you write for project one, I want you to use this type of lead. Okay? I want to emphasize that. This type of lead is what I want. Okay? This, speech interview lead. Got it? So I could have written, this would be kind of old, this bottom one is the old-fashioned way of writing leads. It used to be they wanted to cram all this information into the lead. They were trying to do all 5 W's in one paragraph, and it made the paragraph too long. And so, and again, still some professionals still do that today. But I had a textbook many years ago that I learned to really love and respect, and it taught a different approach. It taught the two paragraph lead form, the lead and the complete lead. And so the complete lead, by the way I teach it, are the first 2 paragraphs, maybe even 3 if you need 3 or 4, whatever. However many paragraphs you need to do your summary, usually just 2 is fine. You have your lead, short and concise, powerful. And then your second paragraph can be 2 or 3 sentences to wrap up your 5 W's. So anyway, so this is in the old way of doing it, not in this one. Dr. Richard Gomez, the state migrant education program director, says the achievement gap is closing in Washington State, but we have a long way to go before students of ethnic origin catch up to white students. Okay, it's a lot more wordy. It's less powerful. I mentioned earlier, sometimes less is more, right? In a complete book and also in a news story, less is more. Simplify it and you get something better. I say 15 to 30 words, 35 at the maximum for a lead, and you're better if you're closer to 20. And then put that other information into paragraph 2. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about here. So my lead then again, the gap is closing in what the migrant education program, and that's paragraph 1. That's the most interesting thing. Not interesting to you, but the audience I had, that was it. Then paragraph 2 goes on with the other information. The education reform in the state is helping all classes of students do better on the state possible assessment, Dr. Richard Gomez said. Also a frequent device, by the way, that the presumption is that Dr. Gomez is the program director. So you can kind of put his title in the lead and then put his name in the second one. And people follow. We go to the direct quote. I just said I took my lead from the direct quote. So all the ethnic groups, in quotation marks, paragraph 3, all the ethnic groups close the achievement gap between themselves and white students in last year's statewide WASO test. He says white students, should be yes there, students grew also, but ethnic students grew more. So basically I'm here, I find the most interesting direct quote I have. I make the speech interview lead an indirect quote. That's what it is it's not a direct quote lead. It is an indirect quote. It's not a direct quote. It's an indirect. The speech interview lead is an indirect quote. So I find a good quote. I summarize. I make it concise, tight, powerful. In paragraph one, I finish the five W's. In paragraph two, I could add another sentence there if I felt like I needed to. And then paragraph three is the direct quote I took the lead from, and bam, we're off and running on. And we start going back and forth with all the details of that story. So again, kind of in graphic form, you get the idea. Oh, I'm going to go back. And there are all sorts of leads, and some of these are you won't find in other books. I put them here in part to show you that you can change a sentence to emphasize anything you want to. All five W's could be emphasized, and in my way of thinking, and the way I teach it is whatever you put at the start is what you're emphasizing. So, number three here is when. When did it happen? After looking all over the county for an escaped convict today, police officers found him enjoying a birthday party with his wife and 2-year-old son. Okay, when did it happen? I put it right at the start. That's the when element. So to me, that's the when. That's a when. And so any element you can have, and number four is aware element. Very seldom do you use aware lead. But it's possible. Just a few inches for freedom, a human soldier was shot trying to swim to a waiting boat. Okay, so nobody can use it right. The main point of this is if you emphasize anything that you find to be the whammy, you can build your sentence emphasize it. But the truth is, most of our stories are speech stories. Most of our stories are based on not always the case. Sometimes it's a what story. So, number two there is a what lead. Police raid on Texas Urban's young watermelon plants may lead to a $10,000 lawsuit because the police officers were stupid enough to think it was marijuana, and they dumped out all those watermelon plants. So, anyways, that's a what. You have other things like five is a how lead. Now, how's good? How lead has possibilities. As I said, how can be a very important question. How does something happen? So this is a lead that emphasizes how. William sawed-off shotgun. Two men held up a 7-Eleven store and came away for Monday. Now you can kind of visualize how they did it. They came storming in with their shotguns. Okay, so yeah, it's possible to do a house. Anyway, so forth. And a very simple one again. This is number 7 is just the energy lead. Attackers lucky to get rid of the former mayor, Dick McCall. His success is very short. This happened to be one where the new mayor, tried to stay alive. This is one I recorded because the former mayor was very popular, but he quit to go into private enterprise. He's given a good job offer at private enterprise, and he resigned, and so the chairman of the city council moved up as mayor to take his place, and he was for not doing a good job, but he was extremely popular, so then he got embarrassed, and so he tried to say that I lied about what he said, and I invited everybody to come listen to the tape. I had it recorded. So, okay, let me talk about something else. Photos. In this day and age particularly, you have to become a photojournalist. It's just part of your job now. The first job, I think I mentioned this the other day, the first job that these newspapers are, the first positions that people are eliminating are photographers. Photography is really, really important, but also everybody knows how to click a camera. And so when a newspaper is trying to cut budget, they start with photographers. And that's too bad, but that's the reality of it. according to research in America, since they lost 2/3 of their advertising, they had to cut budget, and the main budget is people. And so that's where they started, was with photographers. So, and now in this day and age, it's really important you become multimedia journalists, that you become good photographers, good videographers, as well as good writers. It's very competitive that way. So this was at a conference I was at. One of my strategies to being a good photojournalist is take lots of photos. You're bound to get something. And so at this conference, I probably took 400 photos to get that one. But this one told the story for the whole thing. It's a little darker in the projection than it is in reality, but um, a good photo for the story that I wrote. I'm going to go straight to have some other photos here to make my. Oops, I didn't have it on there. It's a different one. Well, let me just talk about photos in general, because we're kind of running out of time. I may have mentioned it before, but when I took over a newspaper, the first thing I did was grab my camera and go to as many different meetings of important people as possible and take lots of pictures. Lots of pictures that were not posed. I wanted to have pictures that wasn't talking, frozen, whatever, get their feelings, get a lot of different emotions in their faces. And so I go in, if I went to city council, I go click, 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 click. They were sitting there, what the heck is this guy doing? But then all the best of those photos were in my file that I could use anytime if it was a story that came up and I didn't want to go back to city council to take some more photos or whatever, and I definitely don't want them sending or don't want a posed picture that's just not journalistic, then I would have those photos that I could fall back on in my file. And so I went to all those meetings and took lots and lots of pictures, trying to just capture lots of different emotions, so that, because I think I mentioned before, if you're talking about something serious, and maybe I will call up the other PowerPoint.